I knew what I was walking into before I touched the door. Not because anyone told me not to come, but because no one in my family had ever really expected me to belong. Voices drifted through the house before I stepped inside. Laughter, glasses clinking, someone saying, "She finished law school top of her class." Of course. I opened the door anyway. "Vivian," my aunt called from the dining room, her smile polite and already fading. "You made it. Made it." Like I'd crossed a border just to sit at the edge of something that was never meant to be mine. My name is Vivian Cross. I'm 34 years old, and in my family, I have spent most of those years being introduced as a smaller version of myself. I slipped off my coat and stepped into the room. Jessica was already near the center of the table. Of course she was. A framed photo from her graduation sat on the sideboard like a second centerpiece. "Jess," someone asked, "have you decided which firm yet?" "Still considering," she said, smiling with the calm confidence of someone who had always been expected to succeed. My father sat at the head of the table, one hand beside his glass. He saw me. He just chose not to acknowledge me until he had to. "Sit, Vivian," he said at last, pointing to the only chair left. Near the end, close to the kitchen, I pulled it out quietly. "What are you doing these days?" my uncle asked, not really waiting. "I run." She's still figuring things out. My father cut in smoothly. "Some people take longer." A few chuckles followed. Soft, easy, familiar. My phone lit up beside my plate. "Segment confirmed. Airs tonight." I turned it face down. For Revenge Pulse listeners, this is an original story written for reflection and entertainment, not based on any specific real person. Around me, the conversation had already moved on, as if I had never spoken at all. So I sat there exactly where they expected me to be, and for one dangerous moment, I almost let them keep me there. But something about that night felt different. If they had already decided who I was before I even arrived, what would happen when they finally saw me? My father stood before the first bite was taken. He didn't raise his glass high. He didn't need to. "Before we eat," he said, voice steady and practiced, "I want to say how proud I am of this family." A pause. Then the turn. "Especially Jessica." A few smiles widened instantly. He angled toward her, making the rest of us feel like background. Discipline. Focus. A clear path. He nodded once, approving his own words. "You stayed the course. You did things the right way." Jessica's fingers tightened around her fork. "Dad, it's just no," he said gently, but firmly. "It matters." Someone across the table leaned in. "She finished law school this year, right top of her class." My father answered before Jessica could. "And the offers are already coming." "Wow," my aunt said. "That's incredible." I kept cutting my food into even pieces. "Not everyone sticks with something that demanding." My father went on. "It says a lot about a person." There it was. The comparison never had to be direct. It never was. "Well," my cousin said, glancing at me, "some paths are more flexible or unfinished." Someone murmured. A soft laugh followed. Not sharp, just comfortable. That kind always landed deeper. "Vivian," my uncle said, turning toward me at last. "What are you doing these days? Still handling paperwork somewhere I run operations for?" "She's still figuring things out," my father said smoothly, lifting his glass again. "Some people take longer to find where they fit." Jessica shifted. "Dad, that's not. It's fine," I said, because it always was. Until it wasn't. A memory surfaced without warning. Years ago, in this same room, I had stood with a folder in my hand and said, "I'm asking for a small loan, just enough to get started." He hadn't even looked at it. "You don't finish things," he said. "I'm not funding another attempt." That was the moment I learned what no safety net really meant. Around me, The conversation flowed easily back to Jessica, back to certainty, back to the family story everyone preferred. Jessica was the daughter my father introduced with pride. I was the one he explained away. And tonight, he was making sure no one forgot it. If he had already decided what success looked like, how far would he go to prove I could never measure up? They thought they knew what I did. That was the problem. Not that I had hidden it, but that they had decided long ago it wasn't worth understanding. I didn't argue cases. I didn't have a title that impressed strangers over dinner. I worked in the space between things failing and no one noticing. Compliance support, vendor records, audit prep. The kind of work where one missing line could delay an entire system. To my father, it was simple. Paper pushing. To Jessica, it was worse. The kind of work people settled for when they didn't have the drive to do something bigger. I used to try to explain. There's a gap, I told her once. Smaller providers need someone to manage the infrastructure before it breaks. If it mattered, she said, someone bigger would already be doing it. That was the difference between us. She believed value came from visibility. I had learned it came from what didn't collapse. So I stopped explaining. And I started building. One contract, then another. Then clients who didn't care what my work sounded like. As long as their systems stayed standing, my family never once asked for the company's name. Another dinner, another version of this table. Jessica will argue cases, my father said with a smile. Vivian files paperwork. Laughter followed. Back then, I laughed too, because it was easier than correcting him, because correcting him never changed anything. My phone lit up again. They're keeping your full intro. Founder credit stays. This time I looked at it longer. Then I cleared the notification. Not deleted. Just removed from sight. The truth wasn't hidden. It was just waiting. And tonight, whether I reached for it or not, it was coming into the room anyway. If they only respected success, they could recognize what would happen when the thing they dismissed became impossible to ignore. Jessica had been praised. Now it was my turn not to be known, but to be reduced. So, my aunt asked, leaning in with practiced concern. How's your apartment these days? Still renting. It's fine, I said. Of course, she added quickly. Nothing wrong with taking your time. My uncle followed with a smile that wasn't really a smile. You settled yet or still figuring things out? Jessica glanced at me, then back at her plate. She didn't add anything. She didn't stop anything either. My father set down his fork as if preparing to explain me properly. Well, he said, Vivian's path has been different. Different. That was his favorite word when he wanted to sound generous. She had a strong start, he continued, then stepped away. Since then, it's been smaller things. Nothing especially stable. A few quiet nods moved around the table. She's never been the type to follow something all the way through, he added. There it was, the version of me they preferred. Smaller, simpler, easy to fit into the family story he had been telling for years. And the truth. The first time my company turned a profit, I was alone in a rented office with a folding desk. The first client who renewed didn't congratulate me. They just sent the next contract. None of those moments had ever reached this table, because no one here had ever asked. My father finally looked directly at me. So what exactly do you do now, Vivian? It sounded like a chance. It was a trap. I run a company, I said, healthcare compliance operations. He let the words sit for half a beat. Operations, he repeated, almost amused. That's one way to describe it. A few smiles returned. I didn't correct him, because by then I understood something. It wasn't that I hadn't told them the truth. It was that the truth, in their language, would never sound important enough. If words couldn't break the version of me they had already chosen, what could the room didn't get louder? It got sharper. Every pause felt chosen. Every glance carried weight. My father lifted his glass again. Not high, not celebratory. Precise. I want to say one more thing, he said. voice calm, almost reflective. No one interrupted. He turned toward Jessica, his expression softening in a way I had not seen directed at me in years. Thank God this family still has Jessica. A few people nodded at once, relieved to land somewhere familiar. She chose the hard path. He continued. Stayed disciplined. Earned something real. Jessica shifted. Dad, you don't have to, I do. He said, still calm, because it matters. He let the silence stretch. Then he looked at me. And you a beat. Just a freeloader. No shouting. No anger. Just a sentence placed neatly in the center of the table. The kind that didn't need force because everyone understood exactly what it was meant to do. Someone let out an awkward little laugh. Someone else stared hard at their plate. Jessica tried again. Dad. He ignored her. Then, almost casually, he reached for the remote. Let's move on, he said, reaching for the remote. The market report should be starting. The screen flickered to life from the adjoining room. A market segment, numbers, deal headlines, clean voices, control, restored. Or so he thought. And in healthcare operations, a major acquisition finalized this week. No one reacted yet. Why would they to them? It was background noise. To me, it sounded like a door unlocking. My father leaned back, satisfied, as if the room were already moving back in his direction. He had no idea what he had just done, and for the first time that night, I didn't reach for anything. I didn't need to. He had already handed me the moment himself. When the truth finally reached the table, who would realize first that he had just lit the match under his own version of me? At first, the segment felt like nothing. Just another polished voice, clean graphics, numbers moving across the screen. Following a multi-million-dollar acquisition, the company is expected to expand compliance infrastructure across several healthcare networks. No one looked up. Why would they? To them, it was filler, something to cover the silence my father had just created, known for streamlining vendor coordination, audit preparation, and regulatory operations. Still nothing. Then the screen changed. A cut, a studio frame, my face, not the one sitting at the end of the table, the one under studio lights, composed and direct, speaking in the voice I used when people were finally willing to listen. For years, smaller providers have been underserved, I heard myself say. We built systems that don't just respond to problems, they prevent them. The anchor returned, smooth and certain. Founder Vivian Cross built the company from the ground up, focusing on operational stability in high-risk compliance environments. No one moved. Then, one by one, they turned my aunt first, then my uncle, Jessica last. She looked at the screen, then at me, and for the first time that night, she looked uncertain. My father still didn't turn. He kept his eyes on the television as if looking away might make it real too quickly. The acquisition marks a significant shift in how compliance operations are being managed at scale. Then came footage of offices, teams, systems in motion. My company. Its name said clearly, more than once, not a side project, not paperwork, not something unfinished. The same table that had just listened to him call me a freeloader was now watching the version of me they had spent years refusing to understand. I didn't smile. I didn't explain. I didn't help them. For once, I didn't need to. The room didn't erupt. It went still. The kind of silence that leaves no room for denial, only recognition, and that made it worse. When my father finally understood what he was seeing, what would hurt him more, being wrong, or knowing everyone had just watched him be wrong, the segment ended. But no one reached for the remote. No one rushed to fill the silence. My father spoke first. Of course he did. Why didn't you tell us the question landed as if he still had the right to ask it? But something in it had changed. Not curiosity, not confusion. Loss. You never wanted to know. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lean forward. I just answered, and something in the room shifted because this was no longer about money or the company or what it was worth. It was about something smaller and uglier. He had never been missing information. He had been protecting a version of me that was easier for him to dismiss. Jessica broke the silence next. Vivian, why didn't you ever say it was this big? I looked at her. I did, I said. You just never listened long enough. Her face changed slightly. Enough. My uncle leaned in. What's the company called? I told him. His eyes narrowed, then widened. Wait, I saw that deal this week. He looked at my father, as if the final answer still belonged to him. But my father had gone still. You should have told us, he said again, quieter now. We're your family. The tone had changed. The strategy had changed. It wasn't judgment anymore. It was ownership. I held his gaze. I told you what I did. I said, you decided what it meant. That was the part he couldn't repair. Because this wasn't about something I had hidden. It was about something he had refused to see. Jessica looked between us, unsettled. My uncle leaned back. The room had changed shape, and for the first time in my life, my father wasn't the one controlling the story. If he could no longer decide who I was, what exactly did he have left? No one asked for a speech, so I didn't give one. I only answered what they asked. What does your company actually do? My uncle said, leaning forward now, as if the answer had suddenly become worth hearing. I set my fork down. We handle compliance operations for healthcare providers, I said. Records, vendor coordination, audit prep. He frowned. That's it? That's what people see, I said. What they don't see is what happens when it's done badly. A pause. We fix the gaps before they become failures, before someone else calls it a crisis. No one interrupted, not even my father. He shifted in his chair. That still sounds like paperwork. I nodded. It is. The kind that keeps everything else from collapsing. That landed differently. Jessica looked at me again. Really looked at me. So you really built all of that? She asked quietly. I built something people depended on, I said. Even if they didn't know my name. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy. A memory surfaced. Years ago, I had tried to explain the business at this same table. You're overcomplicating it. My father had cut in. Just say you handle forms. Then he turned to Jessica. Now that's real work. Back in the present. He leaned forward, reaching for the last version of control he had left. If it mattered that much, he said, voice tightening. Why didn't you show it? Why keep living like this? There it was. Not denial. Reframing. I met his eyes. Because I got tired, I said, of proving myself to people who only respect what they already understand. No one spoke. For the first time, I wasn't explaining. I wasn't asking to be believed. I was simply telling the truth. And that was enough. If everything was finally clear, would he admit what he had done, or try to make himself the wounded one? The silence didn't last. It changed shape. My father leaned back and exhaled, as if he were choosing a different version of himself. We were worried about you, he said, voice softer now. That's all this ever was. No one challenged him. Not yet. We didn't understand what you were doing. He continued. You never explained it clearly. There it was. Not an apology. A repositioning. From judgment to concern. From certainty to misunderstanding. I watched him carefully, because the speed of it mattered. How quickly he could step out of one role and into another without ever standing in the truth between them. Jessica tried next. Maybe if you'd trusted us enough to tell us earlier, she said carefully, it wouldn't have felt like this. I turned to her. You liked being the answer, I said. In a house that needed me to stay the question. She didn't answer. but something in her face shifted. Not guilt, recognition. My father leaned forward again. "We're still your family. That doesn't change." No, it didn't. That was the problem. I let the silence settle before I answered. "Family doesn't give you the right to rewrite what happened," I said. "Not tonight." He frowned. "No one's rewriting anything. You called me a freeloader." I said, "You didn't misunderstand that." The words stayed where I put them. Jessica looked down. My uncle said nothing. My father opened his mouth, then stopped. For the first time, there was no cleaner version of the story waiting to save him, and I didn't offer one. Because this wasn't about making him feel guilty. It was about not letting him escape what he had already revealed. If he couldn't use the word family to erase what he had done, what exactly was left for him to stand on when I left? No one raised their voice. No one argued. The room didn't break. It settled. Heavy. Quiet. Final. I pushed my chair back. The sound carried farther than anything anyone had said in the last few minutes. A few people looked up. Some didn't. I reached for my coat. No apology. No explanation. No attempt to soften what was already clear. Vivian. My father said my name once. Not sharply. Not like an order. Just uncertain. I paused. But I didn't turn right away. That was new. I didn't hide anything, I said, finally looking at him. "You just never wanted to see it." He didn't answer. Not this time, because there was no way to adjust that sentence without breaking it. I looked at Jessica, not with anger, not even disappointment, just clarity. She understood that too. She didn't say a word, but she didn't sit the same way anymore. Not as the answer, not as the safe comparison. Something had shifted under her too, and neither of us needed to name it. My father still stood at the head of the table. He hadn't lost his house. He hadn't lost his money. But he had lost something else. The right to decide who mattered, the comfort of being believed without question, the ease of thinking he understood people just by looking at them. Behind me, the television was still on, muted now, throwing light across faces that hadn't recovered. I slipped on my coat and walked toward the door. No one stopped me. Not because they didn't want to, because they no longer knew how. My hand rested on the handle for a moment. Then I opened it, stepped outside, and closed it quietly behind me, leaving the word freeloader exactly where it had been spoken. Only now. It didn't belong to me. For Revenge Pulse listeners, this is an original story written for reflection and entertainment, not based on any specific real person. Sometimes the people closest to us don't see who we are. They see the version that fits their expectations. But real worth is not always loud. And sometimes the strongest answer is simply becoming impossible to dismiss. If this story stayed with you, tell me where you're watching from, and have you ever been underestimated by your own family?